Joe Dumars' first words as a Pelican could signal a seismic shift for Zion Williamson's future. Find out what he said and what it means for the team right now on Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Thursday, and it's official. Joe Dumars is your new Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations, and he said something that might mean Zion Williamson is going to be traded. I'll read you the quote coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. By the way, if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So let's get into this. This is a Zion Williamson heavy show and the impacts of potentially trading Zion Williamson and why now I might be feeling like a Zion Williamson trade is gonna happen. So welcome to New Orleans, Joe Dumars. What are you gonna do about Zion? That's the biggest question right now. Not Willie Green, but Zion Williamson. Shamit Dua of In the Know reported ownership is kind of over Zion and going to mandate that they trade him, then said maybe we'll see when it comes to that. I've heard similar things, but that nothing is set in stone just yet, that this team wants Dumars to see if he can get through to Zion Williamson. And I've said that for all the good that David Griffin did and all the bad, the biggest miss that he had was just simply not getting off to the best start possible with Zion Williamson in New Orleans. They had a rocky and frosty relationship for the first couple of years. That's not ideal. And if, they had a better relationship, would Zion have been more of a professional? Would he be more bought into if David Griffin could have reached him in a better way? And the answer to that could be yes. And if he was, then maybe there wouldn't be all these injuries to him. And that's a big factor into this. And maybe the team is hoping that Joe Dumars, who has a lot of respect around the league, if you don't think he's right for the job, that's fine. But he has a ton of respect as both a player and an executive and just someone around basketball for his time. 2 titles as a player, 1 as an executive goes a long way. So maybe he can connect with Zion Williamson in a way that David Griffin was unable to do. But Joe Dumars' first comments with the team doesn't seem to signal that Zion Williamson will be back, in my opinion. This comes from the press release that the Pelicans sent out announcing the Joe Dumars hire as officially official, which we told you yesterday they would do. And here's the quote. Quote, "There's a lot of talent on this roster. My vision is to build a disciplined team that is built on toughness, smart decision-making, and a no-excuse mindset. I am proud to have grown up in Louisiana and know how passionate, resilient, and tough we are as a community. Our fans deserve a team that represents that spirit, and those characteristics will be the foundation of our team's culture." End quote. Toughness, smart decision-making, no excuse mindset, discipline. Do any of those 4 words, any of those characteristics in value describe Zion Williamson? Do any of those really describe Zion Williamson? Does discipline really describe Zion Williamson? Does toughness, maybe that one, really describe Zion Williamson? Smart decision-making, yes and no. No excuse mindset, not really sure. I wouldn't say any of those you're like, yeah, Zion's got that one. So regardless of whether there is or isn't a mandate from ownership on trading Zion Williamson, does Zion Williamson strike you based on that comment alone, which is a narrow window into all of this? Does that strike you as the type of player Joe Dumars wants or would build around? The answer to that seems a little bit no. Joe Dumars and his vision for the team is a little bit reminiscent of, the teams he played for and built, the Detroit Pistons, the bad boy era, kind of having that attitude there. But also when you looked at the team he built that won the title over arguably the first super team in that Los Angeles Lakers team of 2004. And I remember that series very, very real. very clearly, sorry, that, you had a team that didn't have one all-star. It was a lot of like blue collar work ethic. We're going to outwork people even though we have a ton of talent. Outwork people doesn't describe Zion Williamson. Now, he's more bought in, I think, than he has been in the past. Absolutely. You saw it on the defensive side of the ball. He was competing on the defensive side of the ball. You don't do that unless you're like bought in and you want to be good. That's like one of the biggest indicators to me about players. Maybe you're not a good defender, but are you trying? That goes a long way with me when it comes to this. And Zion was doing it. So maybe he's turning into the type of guy that Joe Dumars will want. But here's the other thing, right? Zion has not requested a trade. I don't think he's been looking for a trade or anything like that. I think he's fine here, happy here even. But if he and Joe Dumars sit down, right, and Shams Charania of ESPN kind of put it out there that they're going to have like a sit down and Joe Dumars is going to ask him tough questions, all that stuff, right? What's Zion going to say? What's Zion going to say? Joe Dumars comes in and is like, are you going to work hard? You think Zion's going to be like, no, I'm not going to work hard? He's going to say all the things Joe Dumars wants to hear. So I don't know if they need to have that sort of sit down, or is that going to put you into a situation where there's some fool's gold there of, well, he said all the right things and then he doesn't go and live those values whatsoever. That's always been the question about Zion Williamson. Will it click? Will he put it together? And I understand why ownership is just exhausted by this. I think fans are exhausted by it too. You understand his talent. Maybe you don't want him traded, but at a certain point, you can't keep going forward where he's playing under 50% of the games, even under 70% of the games. He's just not been available for all that talent, and you're just not going to have the success you want if you're committing $40+ million to a guy that's going to play 30+ game, around 30 games per season. It just doesn't work. And so wanting to move on from that, I think makes sense when you factor in, and look, I told you all this years ago. With Gail Benson, was not going to like the kind of sex scandal that Zion Williamson was going through, and that has kind of come back. And the team has been fed up with it. They're sick of it. They kind of view it as a black eye. You can call it hypocritical, whatever. It doesn't matter. This is just how they feel. And it's the reality of the situation. They're sick of that kind of stuff. I'm sure you are as a fan too, to an extent. You might not want to trade him over it, but you're probably sick of it. It's not a great look here. And I think when you hear about the team that Joe Dumars wants to build, which sounds good to me, it's kind of a little bit the opposite of, not opposite, but just it's more direct, more forceful, a little bit more of an edge to it than, say, David Griffin was, kind of the way he spoke and stuff like that. And we talked about how Joe Dumars is a different speaker, let's say, than David Griffin is in yesterday's show. That doesn't really describe Zion Williamson to me. That makes me wonder if, this era is like fully done and they're going to go in a different direction. We're going to go into the cascading effects of a Zion trade, what it means for Willie Green, what it means for other guys on the roster in the future of the franchise in the third segment. I want to get into Zion's value coming up next. Where could he be traded to? What teams are going to immediately call New Orleans if that's the case? Those are the teams that I'm going to be looking at here. I just wrote another one down. So let's look at what his value could be around the league, because I think that's kind of tough to figure out. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Skims. I've always had issues with underwear, whether it's fit, comfort, just finding the right style. It's not easy sometimes. I don't like when things ride up. No one likes that. Skims changed all that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. So Skims is awesome. I actually literally am wearing a pair right now. I love the stretch 5-inch boxer brief. I work out and go to the gym 5 days a week, and often I'm just going from work, throwing on some shorts, and then going on to the gym here. You need something that's going to work in a suit, but also kind of work with a bit of an active lifestyle that's not just pure workout underwear that feels kind of weird at times like that. But with the stretch boxer brief, I think I found what I love here, right? They give me all the movement I need for working out without feeling like I'm walking around in gym clothes for the rest of the day. They never lose their shape. They never ride up. I love it. Just makes it easier to work out when you have a pair of these on. So shop Skims Men's at skims.com/lockedonnba and Skims stores. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows over at skims.com/lockedonnba. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans also brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere in an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, defensive stop, every moment feels huge. Just that electricity in the arena. And with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Look, it's not happening here in New Orleans, but these playoffs look like they're going to be fun. If you're traveling, if you want to go to a game, you can save money with Game Time. Last minute deals are my favorite use of Game Time. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Give me your thoughts on Joe Dumars and that quote from him about the culture and what you think the future will be for Zion Williamson. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. There's a whole lot going on here with this team. So no playoffs, but no shortage of news and insight that you want here. You can get it all by subscribing to the daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Plus, you could win big by subscribing. Subscribe between April 7th, 2025 and April 30th, 2025 for a chance to win one of these amazing prizes. A $2,500 Best Guy gift card to upgrade your viewing experience, $300 to Game Time for tickets, and $200 to Fanatics for a jersey of hopefully Cooper Flag. So get exclusive insight into draft coverage, team updates with Locked On Pelicans in your inbox. Subscribe to enter by clicking the link in the description or go to lockedondaily.com. So let's look at Zion Williamson in a potential trade here. And I think this is going to be interesting. Should they decide to trade Zion Williamson, I don't exactly know what his value is around the league. I put some feelers out there, and it is a very big range. It's a very big range. But all it takes is one team. So even if there is a range, you just need someone who really wants the dude and is going to pay more than anybody else. And that's how you end up with what could be a good deal for New Orleans. You're not going to get an Anthony Davis-like haul for Zion Williamson. It would be closer to a Brandon Ingram kind of deal, which is maybe basically salary filler, a young player, and a first-round pick or two, and maybe they're even going to be lottery protected. Look, when he plays, he is supremely talented. And when we saw him play this year, he looked absolutely incredible, right? The problem is just all of the games that he has missed. All of the games that he has missed is just killer. 100 games played in the past 164, right? Like that's not it. The year before that was just 29 games. You're just not going to have the value when you're not available. We're talking about why the Pelicans want to move on from him, and the availability is the biggest one. Look, this franchise, if he was playing 75 games a season, would put up with the off-court stuff. They'd even put up with him, being a little bit out of shape and maybe being late to practices and stuff like that. But when you only play 30 games, 29 games, that's not how it's going to work, right? In 3 of his 6 seasons, he's been in the NBA for 6 seasons, but he's only played 5 years, right? 3 of those 5 have been under 30 games or fewer. It could be 4 if you count the season, 4 if you count the season that he didn't play at all. So 4 out of 6 seasons, he's played 30 games or fewer. Your value is not going to be insanely high. Teams will take a flyer on you. Teams will trade for him. He's not untradeable or anything like that, but it's not like you're going to get the biggest return for him. There would be interest. He's only making $39.5 million next season. That's a very tradable contract. $42 million after that, almost $45 million in the final year of his deal. And at 24 years old, that's going to be the type of player that is very intriguing. Don't get me wrong. But the value is still up in the air. I think there are 3 teams that would immediately be calling the Pelicans. Maybe let's call it 2.5. 2.5 teams that would immediately be calling the Pelicans about a trade here. And you can find ways to make it work. First and foremost, I think it would be the Miami Heat. They're not going to go anywhere in the playoffs. We know this. They want to get kind of a big name in, and I'm sure Zion Williamson would love to be in Miami. with everything. And so I would imagine they would be calling. The problem is they don't have tons and tons of assets here. There aren't a ton of young players that you're like, give me that guy. They're not going to trade Tyler here. I doubt they would trade Bam Adebayo in this sort of thing. So you're looking to try and kind of fill salary and get whatever first round picks they have. I don't know if that's the most appealing offer that you could get, but certainly Miami being Miami and wanting at least named players that can kind of put on a show would absolutely be a team that calls up New Orleans. Another team that I think will call, but might be hesitant to give you a ton of stuff, is the Charlotte Hornets. They have LaMelo Ball, who's played fewer games than Zion Williamson has over the past couple of seasons. Same for Mark Williams, right? And then their rookie second-year player Brandon Miller was hurt most of the year. They're dealing with their own injury things. Whenever we look at trading for players here, if I said the Pelicans should trade for LaMelo Ball, one of the things that you're going to get in the comments and the initial downside to that is, well, he's hurt. He's been hurt. Can you bring in another injury-prone player to a team that dealt with a ton of injuries? Charlotte's going to be thinking the exact same thing about Zion Williamson. Now, they've been so bad for so long. I think they're on a 9-year playoff drought, something like that. Maybe it's a little bit less than that. Maybe they're just desperate and they'll take a flyer on Zion Williamson. If it would toss one first-round pick in salary, they could do it. Teams would then really, if your asking price is lower, would be really interested. But is that what it would take to give up, especially when we get into the next segment here of like the cascading effects, the knock-on effects of trading Zion Williamson. And those are pretty significant in my opinion. So I think Charlotte could get into the mix there and would make sense, though I think maybe they just kind of want to do their own reset, even though they're kind of been constantly resetting, and maybe they look to trade LaMelo Ball. Maybe you compare LaMelo Ball with Zion Williamson in New Orleans, but I think with the direction of this franchise, that's up in the air right now. Another team that I could see that I think should make a move for Zion Williamson, it might depend on the playoffs and how that goes for them, would be the Detroit Pistons. They are facing off against the New York Knicks in the first round. They've had kind of a resurgent year. They've been really fun to watch. And pairing Zion Williamson with a guard like Cade Cunningham would, I think, be a massive difference maker for that team. You put him with a pick and roll guard like that, oh my goodness, would they look good. With some of the other young players they have, absolutely you could do something like that. They have salary that they could trade away in someone like Tobias Harris and others to make a deal work. So all of that is to say, I think Detroit could really go after Zion Williamson next year. $26.6 million for Tobias Harris. That gets you a far way of matching Zion Williamson's contract. Throw in another player there in a first-round pick or two, and you can get a deal done. And I think Zion Williamson would fit perfectly on Detroit. And look, you've got someone like Trajan Langdon who's familiar with him, knows the ups and downs with Zion, but is well-respected as a Duke guy. Maybe that's part of it here, or maybe that scares him off. I also think that Detroit as a trade option, it might depend on what happens in the playoffs. I don't know if they're going to beat the Knicks. The Knicks have been really good this year. But if they do, are they going to really rock the boat too much and go in kind of all in too soon? Or are they going to kind of continue what they're doing? And maybe that's the correct move for them. So, that's why I said kind of 2.5 teams for sure when it comes down to it. Look, I think the Lakers could maybe be interested in Zion Williamson. Pairing him with LeBron James and Luka Doncic makes an absolute ton of sense. You could move someone like Austin Reeves, who I'd love to have here in New Orleans. So I think there's a couple of teams that, also could get in the mix for him when it came to that. Would a team like Chicago, who needs to pick a direction, maybe want to get into the mix too? Could you pair him in Indiana if they were open to trading Miles Turner or something like that, to pair him with another elite guard in Tyrese Halliburton? Those are all teams that I think could get in the mix. I just don't know if you're going to get the massive offers that you want. And that's part of the problem. I also wonder if number of teams would be, if you want Zion gone that much, just waive him. They only owe him about $8.5 million guaranteed now. You could just waive him, eat that, and not pay out the rest of that contract. And I wonder if teams are going to kind of dare the Pelicans to do that a little bit if you truthfully don't want him here. And that's why this stuff of like the mandate of he must get traded being out there is just poor mismanagement by the Pelicans on that sort of thing, because that kills your leverage a little bit too. All right, if you hate him because of the off-court stuff, just cut him, and then we'll sign him for free at that point in time. We'll give him the mid-level exception or something like that. And we don't need to give up anything. And we get him for cheaper. on a cheaper contract. I wonder if some teams will dare the Pelicans to kind of go that route when it comes to it. So his value's up in the air. And look, whether you trade him or not, it's going to be dependent on the offers. You won't trade him for peanuts. They won't do that. They'll roll the dice on him for one more year and make it work. And I think if it doesn't work, then you absolutely have to trade him under no matter what. That might mean peanuts at that point in time. Richard Constable, shout out to Richard here, a friend of mine, said a box combo and a pack of cigarettes. But have you seen how much a box combo costs now? Oh, it's expensive. Might be worth it. Might be saving money then. You know, the lottery might also impact this decision. And we'll get into that in the next segment here. And then this is where we'll leave it and we'll tease it to the next segment. Say you end up with a second overall pick or even third, and you draft one of the two Rutgers guys, Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey. You know, your timeline looks different all of a sudden. You know, if you end up with the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th pick somewhere in that range, maybe you keep Zion, you add that player who doesn't look like to be, 1A on a championship team, but is a good starter. Maybe you just try and push for the playoffs next year. But if your timeline gets reset with a Cooper Flagg, a Dylan Harper, an Ace Bailey, that might change everything. And there's big knock-on effects then of all of that and trading Zion Williamson. Let's look at that. It impacts Willie Green. It impacts Trey Murphy III, Herb Jones, basically everyone with this organization. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire Stick 4K services, no console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple and it's all on your Fire TV. Maybe you're not a gamer, but with 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus Max, and more. And with Wi-Fi 6/6E and auto low latency mode, advanced technology, Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smooth, responsive gameplay with lightning fast speeds you need to stay competitive if you are a gamer. So it's fantastic. If you're a gamer, not Fire TV, it's the way to go here. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube, 3rd Gen. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everyday or listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. Win those great prizes we talked about earlier over at LockedOnDaily.com. For your second listen, what the heck is going on with Derek Carr? Does he want out? Seems like he might want out here, but he's too scared to say it. Ross Jackson over at Locked On Saints has some theories about that. Make them your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So in today's show, we've kind of talked about Joe Dumars and his quote for the future and vision for the team. I don't know if Zion Williamson fits into that. Really don't. But if you trade Zion Williamson, there's a bigger cascading effect than I think people realize on this. You're resetting your franchise. If you trade Zion Williamson, you're rebuilding. If this franchise thinks you're trading Zion Williamson and you're going to be super competitive next year, they're delusional. And I don't actually think they're going to really feel that way. I think they're kind of in this for a longer haul and prepared to be bad for a minute, and that's going to be the case. So let's say the draft lottery goes well. Maybe that impacts it, as we said. If you end up with 5, 6, 7, 8, that maybe changes your approach here. So draft lottery day still remains massively important for the direction of this team. But if you end up with a 1, 2, or 3 pick, and that's kind of my, Cooper Flagg's in his tier by himself, but I think Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey are in that second tier kind of by themselves. You could maybe throw a guy like VJ Edgecombe in there. I'd put him in kind of tier 2.5. But if you end up with one of those 3 guys, I think all of those 3 players can be the best player on a championship team. They kind of project as like your 1A guy, your alpha on the team. So if you get them, say it's a second overall pick, and you get Dylan Harper, who's going to be your point guard of the future, your lead guard of the future, and I love him. I think he'd be fantastic. He's going to be a fantastic NBA player. He's not going to be ready to lead you to wins, especially guards can take a minute, for his first 2-3 years in the league. You're looking in 3 years, maybe you're a fringe playoff team if you've traded away Zion Williamson. And if you trade away Zion Williamson, you have a vet, a young player, and two first-round picks, let's say, right? So you're starting to rebuild that kind of asset chest. But by the time that Dylan Harper's ready to be the lead guy on your team, Trey Murphy all of a sudden is much older than we realize, and like at that point in 3 years, and is on kind of the back end of his extension. At that point, you would have need to have made a decision on giving Herb Jones a new contract and seeing what that could be, right? Trey Murphy in 3 years is going to be 27, 28 years old. He's kind of on the back end of his deal. He's still in his prime, don't get me wrong, and he's going to be a very, very good player. But would it be better if you're kind of doing this? But is he, so the question is, if you've got like Dylan Harper in, is your timeline mismatched, right? You have the Dylan Harper timeline, but then you have the Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and other vets timeline. Certainly CJ's not on Dylan Harper's timeline. I doubt DeJounte Murray is on Dylan Harper's timeline at that point, especially with the injury that he's suffering from right now. And so do you need to look at trading those guys to make sure, rather than two timelines, there we go, that you have one timeline? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. And I've talked to a couple people around the league that's like, if you were rebuilding this, what would you do? It's like, if you trade Zion Williamson away, trade Trey Murphy, trade Herb Jones, get picks for them and other young players, and start to build around your young rookie that is your centerpiece. Be bad for a couple years, get better draft picks, try and draft difference makers a la the Thunder, or even a team like the Memphis Grizzlies did. You're rough for 2-3 years, and then you start your kind of ascent. And then at that point, you have all of those picks from the Trey Murphy trade, Zion trade, that you can start plugging in holes that you identify. Hey, we need another shooter. Cool. We can go and trade for whoever we want with the draft picks we have. We need a better power forward or a different type of big. Cool. We got the assets to go and get that guy. You use those assets to plug your holes in the future once you've got the core in place. And your core is Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, Cooper Flagg, and whoever you draft next year. And that's what the core is. Maybe you get a young guy that's our fifth starter, fourth starter in a Trey Murphy trade, something like that. If you trade Zion Williamson, you're not going to be competitive enough to be anything more than, at best, a play-in tournament team in the future, even with health. So you need to you need to bottom out. You don't want to be stuck in that purgatory of the middle of, cool, we're going to have the 14th pick in every single draft. You're not going to build a difference maker of a team that way. You're not going to build a contender that way. Even if Joe Dumars got a little bit, did that before with the Detroit Pistons. That's not how it works in the NBA today. That's where some of the concern about hiring him is, right? And, he's done it before. We'll see what he does again, but that's kind of the concern here. So you might need to bottom out and be bad, and it means trading away probably some of the players that you love and some of your favorite guys on this team. But it would be the prudent move from an asset management standpoint with this franchise to do that and kind of go all in on your young guy. You end up with the 6th pick. It's a different conversation here. But 1, 2, or 3, and you're trading Zion, it's probably what you need to be doing. It also is going to have an impact on Willie Green, right? Like, he's safe for next year, it sounds like. He's coming back next year. But, here's the thing. If you trade Zion Williamson away, like, what's the point of this? What's the point of having Willie Green if you're going to be bad unless he's just a stopgap for a year till you get your next coach? I understand the concept of keeping him, of, hey, we haven't really gotten to see him with a healthy roster. We don't actually know what he's capable of as a head coach. There's been some good, there's been some bad, but we don't really know what he's capable of as a head coach because of how many injuries he has dealt with over his tenure here in New Orleans. And that is makes a ton of sense when it comes to everything. So maybe you give him one more year. But if you're going to trade Zion Williamson away, is this team going to be good? What are we going to learn from Willie Green coaching a bad team without Zion Williamson, without DeJounte Murray to start the year? Are we going to learn a whole lot? And I don't think the answer to that is yes. So at this point, rip the Band-Aid off then. Let Joe Dumars fire Willie Green and go and chart the direction that your franchise needs. And I think it feels like New Orleans is trying to straddle two different things, at least as of now. We'll see. We have the press conference unveiling Joe Dumars on Tuesday. We'll see about it. But overall, there's some concern about kind of the direction here, but that's what a Zion Williamson trade kind of leads to. Leads to nothing great in the short term, maybe in the long term, though. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. Let me know what you thought about Joe Dumars' comments and what it could mean for Zion Williamson's future. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. More to come in tomorrow's show. A whole lot more to come in tomorrow's show. We'll maybe even do some bonus shows over the weekend here too. A lot to talk about here, so subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.